Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today's episode is going to be devoted to talking about what I've read this week for Horror Mayhem. Horror Mayhem is a reading event that takes place during the month of May, where we're reading short horror fiction. This is an event that was originally created by Scott and Becky Bryant, and sadly we lost Scott last year, and so this event this year is taking place in Scott's memory. Becky has come back to the channel, The Bookish Bryants, and she's joining in on Horror Mayhem this year, and everyone is so glad to have Becky back again. So the theme for Horror Mayhem is Decades of Dread, where we're encouraged to read short horror fiction that spans different decades. And I have several collections of short stories and short fiction that really does cover the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. So I started reading in American Supernatural Tales, and this is a book that is organized pretty much chronologically, and it does go all the way back to the 19th century, to the 1820s to be exact. So I read a couple of stories from this book, and I read a couple of stories from a few other anthologies that I have, so that so far I've covered the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And then I made a leap 100 years into the 20th century for a buddy read that I did with Gareth at Book Songs and Other Magic. And I'm also doing a horror buddy read with Allan at Allan's Reads. And for that, we're reading Stephen King, so we're in the 21st century. So I really have been reading through the decades, and I'm reading all over the place. First, a couple of the stories that I read in this collection. The first one in the collection is by Washington Irving. And I don't think he's usually considered a horror writer. I mean, a lot of his writing tends to be more of the comical nature. But he has a story in this collection, The Adventure of the German Student, written in 1824. And it's a pretty creepy story about a student, a German student, who dreams of this beautiful woman. And then somehow he meets the woman of his dream, but she is not an ordinary woman. This is a very short story, and I can't really say much more than that, but this deals with, reanimation of the dead and all kinds of really creepy stuff to drive a person mad. Next, I read Nathaniel Hawthorne's 1838 story, Edward Randolph's Portrait. That was also in this American Supernatural collection. This story is actually a part of a collection that Hawthorne wrote. He wrote 4 Legends of Province House, and they were part of his larger collection, Twice Told Tales. So this is one of those stories. It's a story about a really creepy painting that has been covered by a piece of black silk. It is the portrait of Edward Randolph, who was the founder of the Province House in Boston. Well, this is something Hawthorne has written about in a number of his short stories. Things being covered by black silk, faces being obscured. Right away, I thought of a story we used to teach, The Minister's Black Veil. But, as we come to find out, what's underneath the veil, well, it gets revealed. It does get revealed, and it is revealed right on the eve of the Boston Massacre. So we have, it's sort of, I guess, historical horror. It shows the web of loyalties and frustrations of the colonies on the verge of the Revolutionary War. Pretty creepy. Another creepy story. The next story in this book was Poe's Fall of the House of Usher. And I read that last year for Horror Mayhem because it went along with one of the T. Kingfisher novels that I was reading. So I wanted to read Poe, but I didn't want to reread The Fall of the House of Usher because I read that for last year's event. So I went instead to my little collection of great tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe. This is a really old paperback edition that I have. And I decided for this to read The Masque of the Red Death, because that would represent the 1840s. That was written in 1842. This is a great Gothic horror tale. This is the story of Prince Prospero, who is attempting to avoid the plague. There is a plague going around that's known as the Red Death. And he believes that if he just hides in his castle and, brings a few of his closest friends in with him, all very wealthy, well-to-do people, that they will be able to ride out the plague and not succumb to what it's doing, which is basically destroying the population. So he invites all of these wealthy people into his castle for a masquerade ball that is taking place in 7 different apartments around his castle. And the guests all come dressed in these really hideous costumes. But then into the party comes someone dressed in a costume, meant to look like someone who has died or is dying of the Red Death. And, this is the most hideous costume of all. And Prince Prospero is gravely insulted that someone would come into his home this way, when here he is trying to avoid the Red Death. And he demands to know who this mysterious guest is who so rudely comes in dressed like a victim of the Red Death. And then he finds out who it is. So very creepy, very scary story. Next, I went back to my American supernatural tales for the 1850s, and I read What Was It?, which is a tale by Fitz-James O'Brien. This is the story of Harry Escott and Dr. Hammond, who are living in a building in New York City that has a long history of being a haunted house. So one night they're engaged in their, fairly typical philosophical discussions, and the discussion turns to whether they believe in haunted houses and whether they believe in ghosts. And to kind of complement this discussion, they also begin smoking opium. Well, this goes on all night, and then they go off and go to sleep, and Harry is awakened in the middle of the night by the sensation of being strangled. He feels something, that something has him around his throat, and he fights off this, whatever this is. He can't see anything, but he feels it, and he wrestles this thing to the floor and throws it to the ground, and Dr. Hammond comes running in, having heard the ruckus, and he's completely convinced that this is merely the product of an opium-induced dream. And then some things happen that cause him to think otherwise, as Harry goes about proving that this thing that no one can see is indeed an actual attacking creature. But what is it? So that's what remains to be determined in the story. I think that I couldn't find anything in this book. No, there was nothing that represented the 1860s, so I went to another collection that I have, and this is Victorian Ghost Stories by Eminent Women Writers. And for the 1860s, I read a story by Mary Elizabeth Braden called The Cold Embrace. This is a really creepy story. This was written in 1860, and it's the story of this German artist who was orphaned as a child, and he gets raised by an uncle. And he ends up, as a young person, falling in love with his cousin Gertrude, and he proposes to her by giving her this kind of unusual, sort of creepy ring that belonged to his mother. Well, then he gets commissioned to go off and do some art in Italy by a wealthy patron, and off he goes. And the young woman, the young Gertrude, of course, is totally smitten, and she decides that she is just going to wait for him. Now, her father doesn't know anything about her engagement, and he's going about the business of finding a wealthy suitor for her. And she doesn't want any part of this. So she ends up writing to her artist fiancé in Italy to tell him, that her father has picked out a suitor for her and plans for her to be married on a very specific date. And she tells him the date. Well, at this point, the artist is into a whole new life in Florence, and the betrothed, well, he's pretty much moved on from her. He's got other plans for the rest of his life. He thinks that, it was just like a young person's fling, and that it has, it's just the foolish dream of a boy, and that it's just melted away with time. Or so he thinks. So that's all I'm going to say about this, but it also has a very creepy and chilling resolution. So that those were the stories that I read this week. Then I read and completed this novella by Shirley Jackson, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. And this was a buddy read with my friend Gareth at Books, Songs, and Other Magic. This novella by Shirley Jackson was written in 1962. So I jumped from 1860 to 1962. I loved this book, and so did Gareth. He'll be talking about it in his video also. This is the story of the Blackwood family. When the novel opens, there are two sisters, Mary Catherine, who is 18, and her older sister, Constance, and their elderly and infirm uncle, Uncle Julian. And they all live together in a very isolated house on the outskirts of town. Well, it's a very hostile town. And if you know anything about Shirley Jackson, many people know of her through her famous story, The Lottery. The people of the town in her stories often function kind of as a character in and of themselves. The townspeople here really persecute the Blackwoods. And they do so because they believe that the older daughter, Constance, murdered the rest of the family. Her parents, her aunt, Uncle Julian's wife, and her younger brother, Thomas. They all were poisoned. They were poisoned by arsenic that was in sugar that was spread over their berries that they had at one meal. And the townspeople think that Constance has gotten away with murder. And so the townspeople are very, very cruel to the family. Constance never leaves the home. She will go out of the house, but only to her garden. She never goes into town. And young Mary Catherine does all of the traveling into town and all of the shopping for the family. Anything that needs to be done, she takes care of that. Mary Catherine, also known as Mary Cat, is the narrator of the story. Although she's 18, she is treated as a child by her sister. And there are aspects of her voice that are very, very weirdly childlike. She also engages in a lot of magical thinking. She has magical incantations and magical words that she says to do and undo things and to cause terrible things to happen to people that she doesn't like. And she just does a lot of things that make her sound younger than she is, and then also make her sound not very young at all, because she has lots of really horrible and violent thoughts and wishes against people. She's a fascinating narrator, and the relationship between these two sisters is really, really interesting. All of a sudden, one day, a long-lost cousin arrives on the scene, Charles. And the status quo in this weird little family is suddenly threatened. And that's very problematic for young Mary Cat. Having the status quo interrupted in any way that she is not in control of is experienced as a very threatening thing. And that's where a lot more horror ensues. Gareth and I both have loved this book, and we've loved chatting about it and texting each other. And we're both continuing. We've both finished it, and we're both continuing to think about it and to talk about it. But I am definitely going to read more of Shirley Jackson. I have an anthology of her short fiction, and I'm going to be reading more of that during this month as well. And then I'm also doing a buddy read with Allan from Allan's Reads, and we are reading together Stephen King's collection, You Like It Darker. We had planned to read 3 stories in the first week, and we read those really quickly. So we met already and had a discussion of the first 3 stories, and then we just decided to just keep going. And so we're actually reading the second week's reading now, and that's another short story and a novella. There's a novella in the middle of this book. I remember at some point earlier in the year doing a tag, and I can't even remember what the topic of the tag was, but there was a question about, how do you feel about a novella appearing in the middle of a short story collection? And I was thinking like, gee, I don't know if I ever remember that happening. Well, it's happening. So there's like a 150-page novella in the middle of this short story collection. These have been fun so far, but I think, and as many people have said who have reviewed this book came out last year, they're mixed. They're of mixed quality. And, that's kind of what I've heard other people say about it, and now having read 5 of the stories, the first 5 of 12 stories, I would agree that they are of mixed quality. And I think we both will be talking more about these as we progress and as we have a chance to meet and talk with each other. We're going to have our second meeting on Saturday to discuss the novella and a very short story that followed that. Once again, Allan is really well read he's really well read in everything, but he's read a lot of Stephen King, and so I defer to him as our Stephen King expert. But I'm enjoying these stories, and I'm certainly enjoying reading them with Allan and having the opportunity to meet with him and talk about them. Okay, so that's what I've read so far in week 1 of Horror Mayhem. As I said, I'm going to be reading more Shirley Jackson stories. I'm going back to the American Supernatural volume as well, but I don't think I'm going to keep going chronologically. I felt the need to get into the 20th century. And this week coming up, I'm going to be reading in this Richard Matheson collection. I'm going to read the novella, I Am Legend, and then I'll see what else. I'll see what else is in here. There's a whole bunch of short stories in here. But my friend Gareth has highly, highly recommended I Am Legend, and a whole bunch of people who really know horror have also recommended this, and I promised Gareth that I would read it this month. So this week, that's what I have on my plate for the coming week. So I'm still going to be doing a Saturday wrap-up, but I wanted to really devote an episode just to Horror Mayhem because I read so much and really, I'm reading through decades, and I'm reading diverse authors, and so I wanted to make sure I was giving Horror Mayhem its due. I need to apologize if you're hearing a lot of landscaping equipment during this this video. I tried to hold off, I tried to wait, but they don't seem to be going away, and I don't know if you can hear it as loudly as I'm hearing it, but I feel like every now and then I'm almost screaming to talk over it. So I do apologize, but I just felt like I couldn't wait any longer because they weren't going away. So anyway, that's my horror reading for this week. I am somebody who really never read horror before last year, when I just dabbled and dipped into it, and I had such a good time. I decided to really give it a go this year. I'm still not going to read any hardcore, really gory, really dark horror. But I'm choosing selectively, and I'm having a really good time. So that's Horror Mayhem this week. So as always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.